In this episode of the Stamina Lab podcast, I spoke with Julie Bergfeld. Julie is a health, wellness, and life coach specializing in performance, stress relief, healthy habits, fitness, and weight loss, working primarily with 50-plus men and women. In this episode, we talk about navigating life's inevitable changes, particularly as we age. Julie intrigued me with her insights on how to adapt to each decade of life, and she talked about why she no longer has the goal of living to 120. In fact, you'll be surprised by what she wants instead. I know you get a lot out of this conversation, so let's get started. Hi, Julie. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Glenn. Thanks for having me.
So I want to start to talk about change and how do we best handle change? In your experience, how often does this topic of change come up in your work, and how do you talk to your clients about change?
You know, it's interesting because today has been a day of change for me. As a coach, now it's frequent that I get cancellations, changes in schedule on a daily basis. So my schedule is change, basically. And it used to be that I didn't deal with that very well. And part of that was lack of preparation, lack of mindset around that. And now I roll with it. So I look at change now as opportunity for growth. It's like, okay, I have a cancellation. How can I fill that time in something that's meaningful and productive instead of beating myself up over, oh, they don't like me, loss of money, whatever it is. So in that respect, it really is about a shift in mindset. Okay. And there's also preparation too. So I prepare myself for change all the time. And it's one of the things that I coach people on is how do you roll with things? I work with teachers sometimes, and there's always, the change in school year, change in work week. And it's difficult to maintain a regular schedule when you're constantly barraged with change. But if you look at it in the reverse, in that life is change, right? So life is change. How do you deal with that? Without clinging to expectations, without fixation on what's going to happen and planning that out, but looking at it with curiosity and compassion for yourself when you get it wrong or, when you are not able to deal with something. I think that's one of the biggest things we forget too, is being kind to ourselves when we do have change. Yeah.
And the change that you just said, like for a school year change, a new school year for the teachers, and a seasonal change, I think obviously for everybody, new year, Katie Milkman's fresh start effect is kind of changing it from the negative of change to the opportunity of change, as you were saying.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learned through Tiny Habits is the importance of rehearsal. So when you're dealing with change or you know that something is going to change in the future, what can you prepare for, right? So what do you have control over? And the things that you don't, can you rehearse? Can you visualize how things might go and look at all the different alternatives? Because I think the anxiety over change is that we don't know what's going to happen. Right? We don't know. And that creates fear. And that creates the resistance to move ahead. So if you look at it as opportunity, how can I prepare? I can prepare myself. I can visualize all the different scenarios that might happen and think about, okay, if this happens, then that. If that happens, then this. Then you feel much more prepared when you are going into things. And I think the biggest takeaway there is what can you control? What's within your power? Taking steps backwards and prepare for that. It's like, okay, I don't know what tomorrow's going to be, but I can think about what I'm going to have for breakfast, right? I can prepare my lunch. Yeah.
So that's interesting because when you talk about change, we're talking almost like change that's happening up on us, forced upon us. Like this is something we weren't expecting and it happened. But there's also change that's happening where you have to make a decision for change, where you're like, okay, I have these two options that are at the fork of the road, and I could go this way or I could go this way, or I could just stay where I'm at. And that fear that you talk about is that fear of making that decision sometimes to go down the next road, because I don't know what's going to happen if I take this new job, or if I take this new leap that I wasn't expecting, or take on this new challenge that I'm being offered. It could go wrong. It could, all the things that you could think about in the fear standpoint, that rehearsal comes into play very well.
It does. It does. And that's a little bit different. And sometimes I have been stalled out by that kind of change in my life. For instance, when I was opening my yoga studio, it took me 5 years to actually open the yoga studio. And it was because of that fear of failure, right? So every time I wanted to do it, I had a full-time job, good benefits, no problems whatsoever. And yet I wasn't satisfied with what I was doing. So I wanted change, but I was so fearful of leaving the comfort, right? The comfort zone, that I couldn't take the leap and do the thing. And then finally, with me in that respect, it was really looking at what other people were doing. And I realized that it was me holding myself back. I blamed other people, my husband, my friends, my family. And it was like, no, it's you and your fear.
So how did you coach yourself out of that? And then how do you coach your clients who have in that same situation?
Yeah, it's different with different clients, but for me, it was just self-talk and the realization that it was me. I kept blaming other people, just do the thing. And I told myself too, I got into the mental state where you can always do something else, right? Every
Yeah.
day, right? Every day, it's like you can always go back, you can always do something else. And another question that I ask myself is this a life that threatening situation? I know that sounds really dire, but sometimes when I'm stalled at something, I'll ask myself, or I tell myself, it's fear, but is it life threatening? And then I just laugh and it's like, absolutely not. And I forge ahead. But
Yeah.
there's a reframe that needs to happen. And then, a lot of the tools that I use too, I I read Chatter by Ethan Cross, and he's got some tools there. And I'll visualize, a kind friend talking to me,
Hmm.
and talking me off the fence, and I realize that it's all this rumination in my mind that's keeping me stuck where I am, and it's really silly to say in that route you can always go back.
Yeah, or go a different direction. I think that's what's and I think, okay, worst case scenario, you've opened up this yoga studio, it didn't work out. You're still alive. You're still able to make money. You have skills. You can speak a language. You have your health. The worst case scenario, maybe you run out of all your money. Well, I mean, you're not going to be desolate. You have friends and family that will help you. When you start making those lists of resources that you have, that like, okay, if worst case scenario happens, like you said, I'm not dying.
Yeah, yeah. And I think you mentioned something really important. You have your friends, you have your family, a good support network. And that's something too that's really different for me, especially in the past 5 years. And this is after I sold the studio, was not relying on my support network, but leveraging their strengths a lot more than I had. It used to be, lone gun, I'm going to do this myself, and that really excited me to be the lone soldier out there doing things. But then I realized that I was much stronger by using the support of other people in a variety of ways and building that network. And that's
And
been really hard for me. Yeah.
yeah, and it's so much more fun to do it with other people, do things with other people anyway. Yeah. So you said it's different with your clients, and how do you approach that when they come up with you with that decision
Yeah.
challenge? Yeah.
It depends on what they're stuck on, right? It depends on their challenge, but most of the time it is fear, and it is fear or failure or looking bad, and they don't recognize that. And sometimes it takes quite a while to get to that fear, because I'm not just going to say, oh, you're scared. You can't label them as that, but they need to make that recognition. It's like, oh, yeah, it's this. Oh, yeah, it's that. And so once we get to that, it's similar in steps. It's like, okay, what is the worst case scenario, and looking at that. What else could you do? And a bit of brainstorming. Again, borrowed from Tiny Habits, it's like, okay, what do you really, really want in life? And let's paint a picture to get there and break it down, because sometimes, again, fear is caused and anxiety is caused by not knowing how to get to what you really want.
And these opportunities you're trying to showcase, what are some of the protocols or exercises you do to pull back that curtain or get to that fear at the bottom of that what's fear? Like for our listeners, if they're exploring with it, what?
Yeah, a lot of the work that I do is it's not body based necessarily, where I'm moving people through yoga postures, but it really is when they're talking, I'll ask them how things feel in their body. So it's the resonance of the body and how that presents itself. And sometimes what will happen is they'll realize, oh, this is the same feeling that I had when I was a little kid and I got lost in the supermarket, or, something like that. And then we identify, okay, what did that feel like? What were the feelings that you had in your body at that time? And they'll recognize, oh, that was fear. Oh, that was my fear of being left alone, or whatever it is, right? So body based in those sensations that come up for you, that's one thing that I use a lot.
Hmm. And do you think that is rooted in you as a yoga instructor and how yoga has taught you about change?
Yes, and through my coach training as well. So
Yeah,
there was there was something called focusing, and it was popularized by Gene Gendland back in the 60s and 70s, and that actually was part of our coach training that I went through. And this is beyond Tiny Habits, um, and there was a lot of mindfulness instilled as well, which I practice today.
sure.
But it really is about getting in touch with what's really going on. What are the emotions behind that? How do I really, really feel? And once we can get to that with a client, which for some people is very scary and new, it doesn't matter how old they are, they've never done that. But once we can get there, then the changes that happen in them are huge and much, much faster. So yes, and also to go back to your question, is that because of the yoga teacher? Yes, I embodied that as a yoga teacher, and then the training helped to enhance it and bring it into coaching as well.
You mentioned mindfulness, and I think that's something that in every conversation that I've had on the podcast, mindfulness is a baseline set of skills. It's like the most leveraged skill. I mean, sleep is too, because I'm a proponent of the sleep, obviously, but the mindfulness based meditation, or just everyday mindfulness, as Ellen Langer says from Harvard, is just to continually to be aware, both interoceptively as well as in your environment, your thoughts. Just what? Oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. Being inquisitive of that, and I think that is an exercise that skill is something that everyone should start, because it ripples into every part of what you want to try to do and achieve.
Yeah.
And that's been your experience?
Oh, definitely. When I bring that, and when we're able to bring that in small increments to people, it's amazing how things change. Sometimes I'll start a coaching session with them just sitting there, closing their eyes and bringing attention to their feet, the soles of their feet, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then the toes. And it's amazing just after like 2, 3 minutes of something like that, how different their demeanor is.
Hmm.
And it will change the course of the conversation that we have as well.
Yeah, my favorite is walking meditation or mindfulness, where I'm just paying attention to every foot hitting they're touching the ground, and it's literally grounding. And it's you're walking everywhere, so it's just an easy way to practice that mindfulness, and takes away all the stress, the overwhelm, because all you're doing is present on your feet. I think that's just an easy way to practice mindfulness.
Yeah, definitely. And I realize now that I know much more about mindfulness. how much I didn't have it when I was younger, especially when I was really competitive in athletics, and how it can transform my relationship to my body and to
Hmm.
other people.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I'm 51 now, and I'm still competing. I just really started competing again when I was right before I turned 50, and racing against much younger people that are physically stronger than me. And there is something to that wisdom of all the mental work that you do that allows to still compete at the level that I'm competing with those with that demographic. And I put it all towards that being aware of my thoughts, not knowing when thoughts are coming in that are not useful to the actual event or race I'm in, and letting those thoughts go, because this is not helping the effort at the moment.
Yep.
And that's really, I think, really where you, especially in longer races, and I know you've done long races, especially in longer races, that's really what it's about, is just trying to keep yourself focused and not letting those negative thoughts come into play.
Yeah, absolutely. One of my things that I'll do in a yoga class is I'll have someone come into a pose, a challenging pose, like Warrior One, Warrior Two, where it takes muscular effort to be in the pose. And I have them just stay in the pose for maybe up to 10, even more breaths. And I'll start asking, is it the sensation that you're feeling and reacting to, or is it your thoughts about the sensations? Things like, this is hard, I can't do this, I'm not strong enough, because those are what's going to take you out. It's not the physical sensation, it's the thoughts about the physical sensation.
Yeah, just that moment of not just being present that has you wiggle and fall,
Yeah.
which is okay because you're learning every time. Um, so I wanted to ask about change for life transitions. I understand that the primary part of your clients are in the 50 plus age group, which I am in now, 51 age group. So I was curious how what type of transitions are they going through? And basically I want to know that because I'm becoming more 50 years old. So I want to know what do I need to look forward to. But for everyone else listening who are not only just going through a transition of 50 plus, but I think it's whenever you hit these decade marks, you're going through and the science supports this, you're going through a reckoning of where you are, and you get the most energy and drive right as you're turning to a decade, and right after that decade, because you're in this contemplation state. And I'm really curious, especially specifically for the 50 plus group, what are you seeing that what kind of transitions are they going through?
Yeah. Um, well, as I'm in my mid 50s, and now things are a little bit smoother, but I would say that for me, before turning 40, and definitely before turning 50, there were major transitions, and it smoothed out a little bit. And so what I see in my clients, for women, menopause, that's huge. Perimenopause, menopause. And what I see mostly, and men have their own issues too, and I'll talk about in a second, is, well, this always used to work, right? When they're trying to lose weight or, get fitter, this used to work. And I'll ask, well, when did it used to work? Oh, in my 20s and 30s when I was in college. It's like different ball game, right? Different ball game now. And so that's a huge hurdle, is to get them to recognize that, no, this is different now. We need to change your mindset. We need to change things. And it's not, throwing everything out, but there are different tweaks to be had as you age, accepting where you are, right? Accepting your age, um, physical or mental, and adapting the things that you do. Like, you need more sleep, you need more stress relief, you definitely need the down days even more. Doesn't mean that you can't go hard on the hard days, but you need the more down days. You still need the hit type of training or interval training even more, and the strength building, but it really is a shift in how they're operating, and food choices as well. And with men, it's the same things. I see a lot of men who, I was working with a guy in his 60s on mobility training, and triathlete, and he would not stop. He was so busy, but he was always hurt. So
Mm-hmm.
it's like, yeah. So there's and that's unfortunate because as athletes, we're very fit and very able to do things, but you got to admit that things don't function the way that they used to. The body doesn't repair the way it used to. The tissues are just not as strong anymore unless you're, Brian Johnson. But so it's the same thing where there has to be a recognition of, yeah, maybe I can't do all this at once. Maybe I do need those rest days and those down times. And so I think that's the biggest thing, is to accept where you are and then to incrementally begin to make changes based on what you need. Do you need more collagen? Probably so. Do you need more protein? Probably so. And again, going back to tiny habits, it's like, okay, what's going to give you the quickest win? What's going to give you, what can you easily implement? And let's start there, right? A lot of times it's sleep.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. And what I found, what sleep is the ultimate recovery tool, and not, obviously not just for your body, but your mind, to be able to have that mindfulness, have that control over those negative thoughts. And I think what I found now is that, yeah, I do need more recovery time, but I can still perform at the level that I was, but without as much training, because I'm taking the recovery time to do what I need to do, and my body's still able to bounce back and perform. Especially if you've been an athlete or you've been competing for most of your life, you still have all the memory, muscle memory, and everything. You just need more recovery time to be able to perform.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. In fact, with older athletes, I think there have been some studies about they don't need as much endurance. They definitely need more of the speed training to keep the speed up. But
Mm-hmm.
it's like if you've been competing for some time, you don't need to do as much volume. It's just in your bones.
Right, right. And then then you talk about sleep and how that plays into the the coaching as you get into your 50 plus years, even your 40 plus. Well, you made the excellent point, the key point, which I think is so key, and what we talk about a lot at Stamina Lab, is it's this transition of what wasn't working, what was working for you before. All of a sudden, you hit a wall, and it usually comes in your mid to late 30s, where you're like, okay, and it's already trickling down before that, but that's when you're like, wait a second, you hit a wall, and you're like, all right, whatever I was doing is no longer working for me. And then that's when this quest that you go on. Lots of people have it as a midlife crisis. You got to blow up everything and try to figure it out. But it's trying to be more strategic about it. How do you talk to your clients? What kind of exercises do you go through to help them with that shift in mindset?
Uh, um, I look for other transitions in their lives, and I
Hmm.
start to create analogies there about, how they manage that transition, and that this is similar. How can you manage this one, to make it less daunting for them? I'm also looking at other people and, maybe someone who's a little bit older than them and how they manage a transition, something like that. But again, it's working with the individual, asking questions about, how has it been? And sometimes too, it's really easy, depending on the client. Some people are very open to feedback, but looking at the gaps. So if they're in their late 40s, 50s, and they tell me they're sleeping 5, 6 hours a night, I'm like, oh, that, and what I'll do is we'll work on that first. I'll point out research studies. I never tell people like what to do, but I'll mention, oh, did you know that here's a research study, and I might send them a journal article or something like that. But I really try to work with the individual, figure out where the gaps are, and help to create a safe environment instead of insisting on any sort of change without their buy-in.
Makes sense. Yeah. Um, and then stress, obviously, in our always now instant feedback data streaming world that we're in, stress is just at a all-time high, and we're seeing it obviously we're seeing the repercussions of it in all different areas. How much of managing stress is part of your practice? And obviously sleep is a key part of that, but
Yeah.
how else do you?
One of my pillars, so my pillars are make the acronym SOAR: sustenance, optimal mindset, activity, which is like movement and just general and exercise, different things, and then restoration. And so that falls into restoration, as does sleep. And again, I consider that the foundation, because without that, the other things really can't happen very well.
Mm-hmm.
So, of course, meditation is one thing. Some people can't meditate, and I'm cool with that. But can you be more mindful about your day-to-day operations, right? So mindfulness is there. A lot of times it's just a simple breathing exercise, and I get them to reinforce breathing into their day, even if it's like, I'm going to wake up. So again, a tiny habit. First thing in the morning, wake up, and I'm going to breathe for 2 minutes, right? I'm going to notice my breath. And I was working with a fellow, really high pressure in his 30s, and on job where he's working like 80 hours a week. And I introduced just a breathing exercise in the morning to him. And that's one thing when his schedule got super crazy that he kept in his schedule, right? And he found that doing that, it set him up for the whole day.
Yeah.
Just 2 minutes in the morning. So if I can get them to increment, to implement things like that, and then throughout the day, maybe there's a breathing break at lunch after I finish my lunch or whatever, that's huge to lower the cortisol levels or the levels, and
Mm-hmm.
get people on a more rational state. And then also at bedtime as well, a lot of times there's rumination, difficulty sleeping, and there are a lot of breathing techniques. And this is where I bring in breathing. My yoga practice comes in, and I can give all kinds of exercises there. But for restorative sleep, there are a lot of things that you can do with breath to get to sleep.
I mean, ultimately, a lot of this, it comes down to managing your nervous system, and especially for the stress relief piece, and even trying to get to sleep is recognizing we have a nervous system, recognizing the nervous system can be hijacked, but we have control over how we can manage it. And do you break it down to the nervous system level with your clients?
I do. But I talk to them in terms that are appropriate for each client.
Yeah.
And so I think the first thing that I do with someone is to allow themselves to acknowledge that this is hard, whatever it is, that nothing's wrong with them for feeling this way, and feel safe in their skin. And then we can start to make the change and regulate the nervous system. And it might be, for instance, sleep can be a problem with a lot of people. And it
Mm-hmm.
might be that they don't have a really good bedtime routine. And by that, it can be as simple as, I'm going to have a cup of tea, do some light stretching, and then go to bed. Or I'm going to do some foam rolling for 2 minutes before bed. But, something to downregulate the nervous system. Actually, foam rolling is a really good thing to downregulate the nervous system. And then add in breathing, and it's magic. But it's like, what can they get themselves to do, right? Going back to tiny habits, to downregulate the nervous system. Maybe it's stressful day, you call a friend. Maybe it's standing outside for a couple of breaths, or taking a quick walk to the mailbox. I mean, quick, right? You busy people, but it's like, how can you take a break from what you're doing, downregulate the nervous system, and then reinitiate in a more clear state? And there are a lot of different ways to do that, but those are some examples of things that I've worked with people on.
It's funny you mentioned the foam roller. Lots when I meet somebody, or if they become friends with me, and I've been at their house, and I know they don't have a foam roller. Very soon, they'll be having a foam roller delivered to their house.
Yeah.
And that serves also, from a tiny habits perspective, that's like a prop. You stick it. I keep mine beside the television, so that way, watching TV, it's sitting right there. I can roll out while I'm watching this television show. Make the easy tiny habit. So you had written about you used to want to live to 120, And I too have said I want to live to 120. And but now you no longer think that, and I still do, because I like that like to have the marker out there in my brain, like, okay, that this is a marker for 120. Now it's the ideal, or the vision, or the place to build habits to work to get there. And we recently had a podcast on with Dr. Zain Hakim where we broke down health span and lifespan, and obviously, yeah, 120, but really what you're trying to do is extend that health span as far as you can to get close to the lifespan. So you're great. You're golfing one day and you die the next day. And so I was curious, you could talk a little bit about your journey from, okay, having this 120 marker in your head, I want to live to 120, to getting to where you are today.
Yeah. So I am type A. Like, there's no type B. And I'm so driven. And what I find is the more that I fixate on a goal and expect a certain outcome, it actually stresses me out. And so what I chose to do, and it's still really hard for me to think about no number, no goal, nothing like that, but it's more of a feeling and an aspiration of how I want to feel and how I want to be. So I've created more markers, much like Peter Attia talks about with his centenarian Olympics. And
Yeah.
so I've created some markers that I want to be able to achieve in my last decade, whenever that might be. And it might be, 110 to 120 is my last decade. It might be that. My grandmother lived to be 99. Um, and my parents are pretty close to 100 right now. But so it's more of how I want to feel, what I want to be able to do when I'm that old, like get up and down off the floor with no hands. I want to do that. I see so many people younger than I am, and they see me getting up and down at the gym. They see me getting up and down off or standing on one leg and putting on my pants. And they're like,
Yeah.
wow, I wish I could do that. And I was like, you just can't do it yet. That's what I said. You just
Yeah.
can't do it yet, right? Let's
Yeah.
practice.
Growth mindset.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah. So anyway, but to me, and this goes back to measuring things so much too. I've stopped wearing my Oura ring, and I just got a smartwatch, and I'll probably stop wearing it too. But I don't like to be tracked and told what to do,
Mm-hmm.
and have these like goals set for me. I'd rather focus on, because I'll achieve them and more. Um, and so it's the same thing with age, that I don't want to have to chase a goal. I want to feel good about the quality. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, that's interesting so much about the relationship with data that we different people have, and where we have it. I think it's almost a journey you go through with, like, oh, this is really interesting, and the data is really interesting. Like what we found mostly with, especially with in the sleep coaching space, but it's been pretty well documented for all these wearables. Is, okay, now you have the data, and the data tells you that you sleep 5 or 6 hours. Great. That doesn't lead to change. It doesn't. That's actually not what leads to change. And so that's really what, where the work we're doing is we're saying, okay, yeah, you got this, you had this, it didn't get your sleep, improve your sleep. Now what? All right, let's go back. And a lot of it's doing some basic stuff. What I thought was interesting is that when we have, we have all these data that we have, and we have all the data pull into our app, and we can see all their sleep data. But when we give someone a physical sleep diary to write things down, much more impactful, because now it's just not this background data that's happening. They're just being super aware of what's happening, and it's such a low-tech response to the problem, but so much more impactful because we're paying more attention, being more
Yeah,
mindful.
100%. And so it's basically qualitative versus quantitative, right? And now I have to say that there's nothing wrong with the Oura or sleep trackers. In fact, those things have helped me to improve my sleep. But to the point where now I don't feel it, I don't feel I need it. So I'm much more intuitive about what I am doing, what I'm not doing. And now, instead of having to rely on something like that, I know the next morning, oh, right. And then I might look at my number if I'm wearing something. Um, But I know intuitively, just by how I'm feeling, and that mindfulness comes in, what I did the day before that may have impacted my sleep. It's like, oh, bedtime was a little bit later. Oh, I ate some foods too close to bedtime that, did this and that. Um, but there's nothing wrong with having that data, and it was super helpful for me a couple of years ago.
Right, right. And as I said, it's more of a journey. I mean, and for me, I wear an Apple Watch, I have an Aura Ring, and I have an 8 sleep bed. So I've got all the data pieces together, and I find it more useful now for a what if scenario. So like I just got a flu shot this week, and leading up to the flu shot, there's so much research that specifically Matthew Walker wrote in his Why We Sleep book about how vaccines and immunizations have so much stronger impact if you've had a well-rested week leading up to that time period of getting that thing. So I was like, okay, I need to dial this in for the next week so I can get my flu shot, and then just seeing what more of a curious, okay, what's the data look like after I got it, because I was a little feverish afterwards, and oh, that's interesting, a piece of. And so for those type of experiments. So yeah, no, I'm a fan. I just know that there's a lot of solutions that you can have that you can do without or in accompanying the wearables, which is what we do.
Right. And I think that the key there is looking at it as, oh, that's interesting, instead of beating yourself up over, oh, I'm bad because of this, or I can't do this because of that. But that outlook, right, that mindset, oh, this
Yeah.
is interesting. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And is that curiosity and that interesting thing, is that the opportunity mindset we were talking about before, or is it's maybe slightly different, but
It's slightly different. So opportunity is like, oh, this is happening right now. How can I make an opportunity out of it? In this, it's more like, oh, okay, this is happening. How do I feel about it? How is it resonating in my body? So it's more present, mindful, whereas the other one is looking more into the future about how I can leverage this, right? How you can, yeah.
Yeah. And the opportunity mindset is more connected to a resilience, being able to come back stronger than you were before. I'm like, okay, this happened, but how do I build this better system to improve that next time?
Yeah.
So I think you wrote something about this, but I'm like, dying is the ultimate change that we have. And so, and maybe that's where my mindset is as I'm getting to the halfway point, or depending on how old I think I'm going to live. But trying to manage that concept of change is a challenge. Have you thought about that? Do you talk to your clients about that?
Trying to manage the concept of change?
Well, the change of end of life, basically. Right now we're not anywhere close to it, but it becomes more apparent, or it's more clear as we get older. And I think for me, I think, and this is, I guess, I'm just asking for coaching, but how like it's coming up, and you're like, okay, I want to do stuff, and these things are going to start changing, where I'm not going to be able to do everything I want to, because I'm getting closer to that
I
point.
think the biggest lesson for me has been to accept each day as if it's your last. And when you look at it that way, it changes the dynamic of how you interact with yourself and with other people, and what you choose to do. And I know it sounds dire, and it sounds really desperate to look at things like that but it makes me more gracious, have more gratitude, be more collaborative, be just a nicer human overall. And then I get a little bit sad, and it's like, oh, I wasn't doing that before.
Yeah.
But yeah, and so really getting people to understand that this could be it.
Right. And you want to be closer to the values that you really care about during that
Right.
stage.
Yeah, and then we can do values work if they're working through some sort of transition like that. But, and going back to, what do you really want to do? What is your purpose? And this gets into like blue zones. It's so curious about blue zones. We haven't talked about that yet. That most of the markers in the blue zones, it's about mindset, it's about community, connection, purpose, having some sort of a belief structure.
And blue zones, for our audience, let's describe what blue zones are. I mean, there's a book about blue zones, and there's actually a fantastic Netflix show about blue zones, which I don't remember the exact title of it, but it's called Blue Zones. But I highly recommend it. It's just came out in the last few months. But describe blue zones and how they relate to our longevity.
Yeah, this was a National Geographic project, probably started more than 10 years ago now, and they identified, I believe, 6 different zones where the people in those areas lived longer than other people. And the fellow who led this, Dan Buettner, I believe is his name, he identified criteria that were similar among all these people. And diets differed slightly, movement differed slightly. However, it was like natural movement, right? It was natural movement. The food was mostly plant-based, low alcohol, and then family connections, family first, a belief structure of some sort, whether it's God or whatever it is, but some sort of belief structure, a sense of belonging in your community, and a sense of purpose. Those kinds of things were in reducing stress as well. But to me, to sum it up, it really is about savoring life, right? Finding your purpose, savoring life as it is, instead of relying on external forces telling you what to do and being stressed out about that. Instead of being so driven, to live to a certain point, it's just like, let's just see what happens, right? Let's just see what happens.
There's a part in one of the episodes, I think it's in Essential America, there was a gentleman who they visited in the Netflix show, and they were trying to meet him. He's supposed to be 100 years old, and they got to the ranch, and he's up. There's a guy up on the horse, and he's riding around, moving the animals around, and he's like, well, we're trying to find so and so, and he's 100-year-old man. He goes, well, that's me. He's like, no, that's not you. You're up on the horse running around here doing all this labor work. And no, they went and verified it at the Capitol and came back and like, wow, I'm like, that's pretty fantastic. I mean, those are the kind of stories you want to continue to put into when you talked earlier about, who are some role models that you can put into your mindset. It's people like that are, and that, their purpose is clear every day. I'm out to do this, and I got my family and friends around me, and I'm still up and doing things I love.
Right. And so going back to purpose, my purpose is not to live to 120.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And so some people get fixated on that, but my purpose is to live well until my dying day. Yeah. And that might be 120. Different mindset.
If you could give just one piece of advice to help a person who to prepare for life changes, that whether it's moving into their 30s or 40s or 50s or beyond, what would it be?
I think the one piece that's most important, I mean, there are all kinds of tactical things that we can work on, but the one thing is the acknowledgement of this is hard, or this might be hard, and being kind to yourself, having that self-compassion. And what I find in the majority of the people that I work with is that's lacking. And I don't know if they forgot how, or if they never learned that. But it's that sense of self-compassion that, yeah, this is going to be hard, but I'm going to do it anyway because this is calling me.
That's wonderful. I think a perfect place to wrap up. Julia, if someone wants to reach out and contact you, how do you recommend they connect with you? What's the best way to get connected with you?
My website, it's juliebergfeld.com. That's the best way, and all of my social links are there.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Julie, for taking the time to be on the show. And thank you, everyone, for listening. Until next time, be well. Welcome to the newest episode of Stamina Lab, hosted by me, Glen Lubbert. If you're ready to upgrade your performance, achieve mental clarity, and improve your well-being, well then you're in the right place. You'll hear the stories of professionals who have taken on big challenges while managing their energy and longevity through the ups and downs of pursuing their goals. Enjoy this episode, then head to the show notes to learn more so you can take the next steps to build the habits and systems you need to achieve your dreams.